100 questions in 5 minutes or less. Let's get to it. Question 21. What were the key challenges you faced when writing your current book? So my current series and my current book, The Blood Dim Tide, is book 2 in historical fantasy series, and this is set in the 13th century. So the book starts in 1260. Because this time period and the part of the world I'm writing in isn't that well known, for some people it's basically going to feel like a fantasy world. So in the background for the last 3 years I've been doing research, books, what I can find online, and basically building up a picture and doing world building for this period in history. Everything from the characters involved, some of which in my book are based upon real people, some of them are fictional people, and blending the two together, transportation, food, climate, the army, the weapons, what was going on in terms of the political landscape, and gradually piecing all of this together to create a comprehensive picture in which I could then tell the story. And although it is historical fantasy, I'm changing some aspects. I'm bringing in a kind of magical aspect of the book as well, to the story. I'm still using history as the main engine, and I'm dancing between the raindrops of some historic events and moving forward. So I'm not making absolutely everything up, and blending all of those elements together was an enormous challenge. So finding a way forward that was satisfying in terms of the story and using the historical landmarks, the different events in history to tell a cohesive story was just the most difficult thing for me, because I'd done all of this research and in some ways I had to forget certain aspects and just put them down, because this will feel very alien to most readers. They won't know anything about it. And my premise is always, even if it's a standard fantasy series, if you put too many roadblocks in the way of a reader, too many strange terms, too many difficult things, and you essentially throw them in at a deep end, some readers are quite happy with that. They'll just kind of fumble their way through, and then once they kind of get to a certain point, they understand what's going on. My approach is I'd rather ease them in a bit more gently and trickle some of the details into the story. So in some ways I've hidden some things, I've changed some phrases and terms to something that people will understand a bit more, but then blending it with all historical things to make it feel realistic to that time period. Because my goal is I want the readers to have a good time, I want them to enjoy the story, I want them to be invested in the characters. I don't want to create something that's so dense they feel like they constantly have to keep Googling things to find out what's going on, or what does that mean, or who's that. I just want them to enjoy the story, enjoy the adventure, focus on the story, the characters, the world building, and invest in the characters too and what's happening to them. So that was my focus, of taking all this information and then kind of brushing off certain parts. And in terms of historians reading it, well, it's not historical fiction for one, it's historical fantasy. So I do deviate from history, but it will feel very new to a lot of people, as I said, because they won't know this period in history and they won't know this part of the world. So it was a lot of hard work trying to find that balance, and that just took me a lot of time of trial and error, getting feedback, working with my editor. I want to do straight fantasy next, because this has been extremely difficult for me to write this whole trilogy and get it to a level where I feel like I'm giving them enough information that some people say, oh, this sounds really cool, I'd like to go and find out more about the actual time period, versus other people going, there's just too much going on here, I don't understand, I can't get to the story because all this other information you've introduced has got in the way of it. Right, so I'm going to move on to the next question. I'm going to do a few questions together today and make an extra long video. So question 22, do you listen to music whilst you write? And the answer is yes, most of the time. I never listen to music with lyrics, because then the words are going into my brain and I just start typing them out, or I start thinking about them. I only listen to soundtracks. It started way back in the day with kind of basic instrumental music, buying the CDs of soundtracks. I used to do that and have them on endless repeat, music like Philip Glass, a lot of classical music. There's nothing too kind of wild and weird. I've got some favourite musicians in terms of composers that I listen to a lot of their work. So Hans Zimmer is probably my favourite of all time. I love John Williams, I love Thomas Newman, there's a bunch of others that I like, but Hans Zimmer's just created some of the best soundtracks, movie soundtracks, I think, in my opinion, ever. Some wonderful ones. There are classic themes, that John Williams has created that will live on for decades, but in terms of mood music as a whole, to create the atmosphere of Dune or Batman or whatever it might be, I think Hans Zimmer is incredible at that. Also, I listen to some music to get me into a particular mood. So I've got all the soundtracks for the Battlestar Galactica TV series, and Bear McCreary was the composer. And he has, great war themes and very emotional tunes. So if I'm trying to get something exciting or write a battle scene, I might put on something like Bear McCreary. And it just kind of gets me into the right kind of mindset. I don't always need that kind of a prompt. Sometimes the music is acting as white noise. I just need it to get me out of the room that I'm sat in. And there's always stuff going on in your life, friends and family and work and other distractions. And in order to carve out time to write is sometimes a challenge, but equally carving out the headspace to do it. You kind of have to forget about all the other stuff, focus on what you're working on. And the music acts as a kind of conduit for that, for me. It kind of blocks out the world in some ways. It puts me back into the place that I'm writing. And I also think writing is very much like muscle memory in some ways. If you don't do writing for long periods of time, it's really hard to get back into the rhythm. But if you sit down in the same place and you're doing the same thing every time and you've got similar kind of music on, it's another kind of mental prompt that puts me in the right frame of mind, and then I can start writing. I kind of put the music on, things come together, and then I move forward. So I always write with music. I've only ever done a few scenes here and there where I kind of think, right, I need just complete silence. And that's why I can't work in like a coffee shop or something or anywhere in public. I'd still have to put the music on to block out everything, so I can just focus all of my attention on the story. So let's move on to the next question. Question 23. Who is your favourite author and why? I can't pick one. I'm going to pick a bunch just because I want to. Stephen King. I love Stephen King. I've read almost everything that he's written. I've still got The Dark Tower that I'm slowly working my way through. I haven't read many of his kind of crime novels. I've read Mr. Mercedes, but I haven't read some of the newer ones. I just prefer his supernatural and horror and weird books. I think he's an incredible writer. I think he's created some of the most disturbing imagery of the 20th and 21st century that's been adapted over and over and over again, because he taps into something incredibly primal that even if we don't share what he's feeling, we can understand it on some level. I think he's just an amazing storyteller. David Gemmell is another favourite author of mine because he's so instrumental in my teenage years and so my formative years and in my 20s, and the way he approaches character and story, that all of his books are really, really lean, but he does so much with so little, and he's able to convey emotions and characters and the scenes incredibly well. So he's absolutely phenomenal. Jim Butcher. I love Jim Butcher for the Dresden Files. I've read some of his other series and I wasn't quite as invested, but I love the fact that he's basically been writing the Dresden Files for 20 years now, and every time a new book comes out, it just jumps to the top of my TBR pile. My TBR pile part bit is behind me now. It's ridiculously huge. But I love the way he does Harry Dresden. I love the short stories set in the same world. I love everything that he's created, the characters and the mythology and the way it all hangs together, and the way Harry is getting deeper and deeper invested in this story and the world of magic, and he's getting more involved with greater powers. He started off as just a wizard who was a PI, essentially, trying to solve little things, and then over time the story builds. And the way he's been able to do that, and he has got better as a writer for sure in those 20 years, that I just straight away thinking, yep, I've got to read the next one. And also I used to be a fan that was like, come on, write the next one. But now, having written, a trilogy and done 2 connected trilogies, I'm amazed he's still writing within the same world and hasn't got completely bored and moved on. So whenever the next book comes out, I'm perfectly happy with that. I'm perfectly happy to wait. I'd rather it was good than he rushed it and it came out too early and it was rubbish. Other favourite authors, people like Tad Williams. He's done a lot of different series over the years. I think my favourite is probably Memory, Sorrow and Thorn. And now, of course, he's got the sequel series, The Last King of Austin R, that he wrote 30 years after, that's still coming out as we speak. His prose, for me, is the best in the business in terms of, fantasy and sci-fi. It's just wonderful. It's so it's so rich. It's something that I can never create, but also it's not too dense. Like, his books are quite chunky, but the stories move at a fair pace. But he paints such wonderful pictures with his text. And it's not really purple prose. It's not kind of like, oh, he spends 5 pages talking about the clouds or something, you know. But it's really beautifully written, and it's always well described, and it immerses you so well within that world whilst building the characters. And sometimes the characters are really annoying, but you know that he's done that on purpose, the way he set them up, that you just automatically start feeling about things. I never start thinking, oh, I can see what he's doing with that character. I'm thinking, oh, Simon, the character, is so annoying, this is such a teenage boy, because he builds them so well. He kind of seeps things in gradually that you do talk about the characters as if they are real people. I never think about them first as characters. He's just that good a storyteller. So he's another one that's one of my favourites. Right, the next question, question 24, is related to the previous one, but it is a little different. It's, who is the author you most admire in your genre? So, my answer is Robin Hobb, because I think she's a phenomenal writer. She is one of my favourites, but she's also someone I admire the most, because she has had enormous success over the years. She's been writing fantasy, you know, probably all the way back to the 80s at this point. And she's done The Realm of the Andalins and other things too. You probably can't see it, but I've got a whole shelf dedicated to her. And I came to her probably in my 20s, so a bit late compared to some people, and I'm still now pacing myself through the books on purpose. I haven't just burned through them all, because I enjoy them so much. And her work is fantastic if you've never read it, and I have some of her other books too to read, Shaman's Crossing and so on. But what I admire about her the most is that some authors, and this is true of some celebrities, TV stars, you know, footballers or whatever it might be, once they get to a certain level, they become, well, they believe too much of their own stuff, let's say, without swearing. They start to believe that they are something separate, something other, something greater than, something special, and like some kind of celebrity. Robin, whenever I've met her at events, or whenever I've communicated with her on email or social media, she's been the same person, whether, you know, writing or when I meet her at events or anything. She's friendly, she's approachable, she's generous to younger writers like myself, she's incredibly kind and patient. She's not standoffish in any way, and she's just the nicest person. And I know people buy books sometimes based purely just upon the work, but also authors now are not exactly celebrities, but we kind of have to have a presence in terms of social media and online. And some people will pick up a book if they meet a person at an event and think, oh, they're quite nice, I'd like to find out more about their work and pick it up. So I'm not saying you have to be nice all of the time. She hasn't chosen to be that. She's just a nice person, and she's very genuine too, and I really admire that about her, because she's incredibly grounded. I know there are some fantasy authors that don't read within the genre whilst they're writing it, or some did say, you know, it feels too much like a busman's holiday, they just can't kind of do it. I'm not one of those. And the other concern that people have is if they read fantasy done in a particular style, or they'll get ideas and then they're like, oh no, I'm not really thinking about it, but I plagiarised or I've copied someone's ideas. I don't have that either. Reading a really good fantasy book written by Robin Hobb or Christopher Buehlman or Tad Williams or someone like that fires up my imagination and makes me want to go out and write a good book and to get back to work on mine. If I'm reading a book and I'm not really enjoying it, it kind of slows down my own kind of process. It makes me feel a bit sluggish. Whereas if I'm reading a really exciting, fun, interesting, or just emotional book, I think, right, I want to get back and work on my book. And it's not a case of I'm going to copy what they've done. My style is completely my own. I've developed it over time. When I began writing, it was kind of a Me Too thing. It felt a bit like fan fiction. There was self-inserts of myself and people that I knew. But over time, I think I've developed my own style. So when I read a Robin Hobb book that has this incredible kind of rich characterization, I then don't rush out and go, right, I'm going to make all of my characters really, really kind of rich, and I'm going to make it a really emotive story. I'm going to make the main character suffer like poor Fitz in all of her books. It doesn't do that. It fires me up. So reading one of her books is an absolute treat for me. And if I am struggling with my own writing, or if I'm reading a book and I'm not enjoying it, I'll just DNF it and put it down, and then pick up something that I know I'm going to enjoy, and it's going to then spur me on. It's going to fire up my imagination. It's going to get me motivated again to get back to work with mine. And you can't always get that. I pick up new books by new authors all of the time, so it is kind of potluck. So sometimes my energy is up and down. So she's been a constant throughout my life since my 20s in terms of reading and being something wonderful. And that's another reason I admire her, because her work is so consistently good. I'm sure if she went back to the early books, she might say, oh, there's things I want to change. But as an external person reading her books, I think they're amazing all the way through.